Okay, let's look at where this video is getting sort of long. So I'll leave the last example is just for you for fun. Let's look at one more example. And this one is going to be instructive in a different way. So here's your argument. Take a look at it, see if you can see which argument form or which valid pattern this excerpt fits into. So pause now. Okay, we're back. All right, well, here's the thing about this one. The first sentence is a question. So we know that that can't be a premise or a conclusion, but we also know that that could indicate what the conclusion might be. If we're asking that question rhetorically, it might be because what we're trying to figure out is whether we should worry about global warming. And now you just have to look at the premise, the rest of the sentences and see, well, so, okay, is it that they're saying we should worry or that we shouldn't worry? And if you look at these premises, that if it's happening, there's no way to stop it. And if it's not, we shouldn't worry. Seems like the argument is probably going to be that we shouldn't worry, right? The person is arguing, well, on either option, there's no use worrying. So the conclusion I'm going to gather here is okay, that's our conclusion. Here's the thing, that was not stated in this excerpt. We're getting closer to the way real arguments actually work when people make them. When you're actually writing or speaking, you often don't have the time, or maybe just rhetorically, it doesn't make sense to state things out like, here's my first premise, here's my second premise, here's my third premise, here's my conclusion. So in this case, the argument isn't even explicitly stated in the excerpt. Or sorry, the conclusion is not even explicitly stated in the excerpt, right? We had to figure that out on our own. But now that we know, that's why I say you should always first start figuring out what the conclusion is. All right, now, take a minute. If that's the conclusion, does that help you? Pause here. If you couldn't get it the first time, see if you can figure out what the pattern is now. Okay, if you could, or if you're done pausing, let's move on. I'm going to tell you the right pattern. And now if you still haven't been able to get it, I want you to try to fit this argument into that pattern. Okay, so the right pattern is something like, oops, not the last one, sorry. Oh my, okay, so I actually made a mistake here. I did not, maybe I'll phrase it this way. I did not make a mistake. This was a trick question. The right pattern is actually not here. It's not on this list. So it's a trick question. It was on as something else on the list. So oh wait, I do have it on this list. I am totally going crazy. If you thought it was this first thing, then you're right. That's the valid pattern here. Okay, I'm embarrassed now. So it's this first valid pattern. Now, what I want y'all to do is if you couldn't get it yet, take this pattern, this first pattern, knowing that this is the conclusion, therefore we should not worry about global warming, and see if you can take this excerpt and fit it into that pattern. So pause now, do that. Okay, so we're back. If we were trying to fit it in this pattern, well, we might say, well, the conclusion then is the C part. So that's going to have to fit in here and here. So it's the second part of if A then C, and it's the second part of if B then C. So what's this going to be? That doesn't involve C. That's something that doesn't involve the claim that we shouldn't worry about global warming. Well, again, this is actually a premise that is not stated in this argument. You have to look really hard at this argument and read a lot into it. So this is one of those times when a premise is actually not stated explicitly in the argument. You're actually going to have to read it into the argument. So let's work backwards towards it. So what are these two conditional claims? If A, then C, if B, then C. Well, here's a conditional. If it's happening, then there's no way we could stop it. If it's not happening, then we shouldn't worry. So maybe that tells us that what comes right before the conclusion, after that, either A or B is if you see a problem here, you're not crazy, but we'll address it in just a minute. Okay, so that if those are the conditionals, then that tells us, oh, well, we know that A is this part right here and B is this part right here. So that means that that first either or is going to be either global warming is happening or it's not. And if it is happening, there's no way to stop it. If it's not happening, we shouldn't worry about it. Therefore, we shouldn't worry about global warming. Now, you may notice this does not exactly fit this pattern. Now, I invite y'all take a minute, pause, see if you can see how it doesn't fit the pattern. Okay, we're back. The problem is that both of these conditionals are supposed to end with C, or what we get in the conclusion. We shouldn't worry about global warming. The second conditional right here does. If it's not happening, then we shouldn't worry about it. We shouldn't worry about global warming, that is. This one, the second conditional, does not. So again, I think there's an implicit thing happening, and we might have to depart from the actual, well, let's just go down. Let's not depart from the actual valid pattern. We'll say what's actually happening is the person is, again, not stating some part of their reasoning. They're arguing if global warming is happening, then there's no way to stop it. And if there's no way to stop it, then we shouldn't worry about it. And then they conclude, so if it's happening, then we shouldn't worry about it. This is a whole other little argument that's inside, implicit in this argument. That is, if it's happening, there's no way to stop it. If it's no way to stop it, then we shouldn't worry about it. So we shouldn't, if it's happening, then we shouldn't worry about it. And that could allow them to say here, if it's happening, then we shouldn't worry about it. And that would mean that all of this right here is functionally an argument for the second premise. Now, if you want to get real advanced, you can see that we might be able to mix valid patterns, right? Not all arguments are going to fit one of these really simplistic patterns. So another way we could run this argument, instead of having it fit this first pattern exactly, and then having a separate argument for premise 2, is it might be that what's really, or really it's the same thing, but in a different way. It might be that it's actually an argument that is mixing different valid patterns. So hold on just a little second. Let me get this good. Okay, so if it's happening, then there's no way to stop it. If there's no way to stop it, then we shouldn't worry about it. And then you get what's called a sub-conclusion here. Okay, so essentially you can see this argument pattern in this argument. But what's happening is that these two premises right here are not part of that pattern, strictly speaking. They're basically giving you an argument for premise 2. That's why you say, so if it's happening, we shouldn't worry about it. There's a so there because that's sort of what's called an intermediate conclusion. We're concluding that from 2 and 3, premises 2 and 3, so that we can use it as part of this other argument for 6 for the conclusion here. So let me color code this for you if that makes any difference to you. Okay, this was a really complex argument. And isn't that crazy that this big thing of 6 whole lines, 5 premises and a conclusion came from 3 sentences where there wasn't even a conclusion stated? But you can see, if you can step back, you might not have understood every step of that. This was the most complex one we dealt with. You haven't failed as a person or a student if you didn't understand that last one. But step back and see, you can actually see this is actually sort of giving us the reasoning that's happening in this excerpt, but it's giving it to us in a clearer way that actually states premises and the conclusion, which weren't stated in the original excerpt. So the argument is that either global warming is happening or it's not. And if it is happening, we can't stop it, which means we shouldn't worry about it. If it's not happening, then we also shouldn't worry about it. So we shouldn't worry about global warming. Again, you may disagree with this argument. In fact, probably a lot of you do, but putting it in this form helps you disagree with it and is going to help you evaluate it, right? For one thing, now you know what the conclusion is. For another thing, now you can point out premises that you might disagree with. What if your problem was with premise 3? You would never know that based on the excerpt because premise 3 is not stated in the excerpt. I'm talking about premise 3 of this 6-step argument. And so you might say, actually, I don't think that's true. I don't think it's true that if there's no way to stop it, we shouldn't worry about it. Maybe we should worry about it, even if we can't stop it, because even if we can't stop it, there might be other things we could do to sort of mitigate its effects, right? But you just learned something. You just evaluated the argument in a crazy way there that contributes to a conversation. But you would have never been able to do that if you didn't break this argument down into its valid pattern like this, because premise 3 is not stated in the argument. Okay, I'm going to end this video now, but let me say this. Hopefully a lot of that made sense. If this last one didn't make sense, that's not a horrible thing. This was very complex. But the general point here is that not every argument exactly fits one of these patterns. Sometimes the patterns get mixed, right? So let me ask you one last question you can pause on. What other pattern got mixed with this green highlighted one to form this 6-step argument? And ask that question again. What other pattern do you have to mix with this green pattern to get this big, long 6-step argument? Okay, pause now. All right, now we're back from the pause. It is, and I'll go ahead and color code it. It is this one right here. We'll color code that yellow because that is contributing to 2 and 3 here. And really the conclusion of the yellow one is going to be premise 4, even though that's highlighted green, because that's also, it's kind of the link between the two patterns is premise 4. Okay, so again, if this last one didn't make any sense to you, if you're saying I followed some of that, but that got really complex, we're mixing patterns now, that's fine. Especially if you understood what came before it. This last one was a challenge.